Just want to make a quick announcement that we're going to get started in about 2 minutes. So finish getting your food and please have a seat. Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I can get your attention, I'm glad that you're all conversing and getting to know each other better as we move forward. Let me just invite your attention. A couple of quick announcements. Well, I first want to say I'm Attorney General Mark Shirley from Utah. I'm going to spend a little more time with our law enforcement panel in just a minute, but I do want to thank my good friend and colleague, Attorney General Greg Zeller, for hosting us once again and for his leadership in this state, and look forward to you all hearing from him in just a minute. I also want to mention that, as you've heard, and we're going to keep repeating this, that we started these first compacts and then these regional summits, and we're moving across the country, and more states are joining every regional summit with a goal in mind. Obviously, with inaction by the federal government, the states have been taking it upon themselves, as you know, to do things, and sometimes very harmful things. And so right now, obviously, we're working in our states and trying to make a difference here, but ultimately our goal is to make an impact and a change nationally. And 2013 is that year when you have both President Obama and Mitt Romney saying that they will go forward with comprehensive immigration reform after the election. Our chance is 2013, and we need to gear up. And so all this is building toward this December 4th and 5th, is it, Ollie? In Washington, D.C. We're going to come together 2 days for strategy session, lobbying, going on the Hill, talking, bringing all of you together. Hopefully we'll get people from all across the country in these important disciplines to then start talking about comprehensive, pragmatic, fair, just, national comprehensive immigration reform. So remember those dates, and please get a hold of the National Immigration Forum folks if you, and let them know if you're able to come. With that, let me just say we're really delighted to have Grover Norquist here today. It's a great honor of mine to be able to introduce him. I first met Grover when I got one of those golden tickets to his one of his Wednesday meetings, which has been called a must-attend and, quote, Grand Central Station of the conservative movement. Grover Norquist, as you know, is a great conservative. He, back in 1985, some say at the request of Ronald Reagan, I don't know, it was probably your idea, to form himself, founded the Americans for Tax Reform, ATR, and the Tax Pledge, and he's become very well known for that, but also has worked with as a leader with the National Rifle Association and others. He is a conservative. And some of you here who may consider yourselves progressive or left of center, why is Grover Norquist speaking to us on this issue? You're going to be very, very impressed because there's a lot of things you don't know about Grover Norquist. I'll just tell you a couple of things about him, kind of setting up for his presentation. He was mentioned in the 60 Minutes. We were talking about that earlier, but a 60 Minutes profile, Steve Croft called him the more responsible than anyone else for rewriting the dogma of the GOP, of the Republican Party. Now, let me tell you, though, this is a man who, born in Pennsylvania, Harvard-trained, undergraduate and MBA. He was a prominent person on the Crimson, which is I understand, the longest continuous running college newspaper in America. Other people who've served there and written for the Crimson and edited there were a couple of past presidents and many Pulitzer Prize winners and so forth, and you're still working on yours. He's an author. But what I love about him is that he's not just a guy that spent his time in the halls of academia or in Washington, D.C. In the 1980s, he was talking about boots on the ground and debates these last couple of times. He was a man who was in war zones, literally putting his life on the line to assist folks fighting against the spread of communism. He's a funny guy. 3 times he's competed in the Washington's Funniest Celebrity and came in second, I understand, in 2009. So he still has something to shoot for. So look for him on some comedian show. Maybe he'll even drop a couple on us today. Let me just say that what you don't know about Grover Norquist is this, and what's very important, and that he is known to actively be involved his entire life in building bridges, cross-cultural, cross-religious lines, working together with ethnic and religious minorities and others to get them together with the free market community so that we all may progress. That's the kind of man Grover Norquist is, and I think you're going to be very, very moved by what he has to say today about immigration reform. With that, please join me in welcoming Grover Norquist. Thank you.
Thank you, General. We're a few days out from a presidential race that's going to determine sort of what direction the country heads for quite some time. And I'm here in Indiana with you talking about immigration because it's the most important thing to focus on if you're concerned about the future of the country, both as an economic power and as a serious leader of the world, or simply as a successful society. There just aren't any issues at the end of the day more important. I want to talk about politics. I know this is business, badges, and Bibles here, spoken ahead and will. But we can get all the communities of faith, and we can get the business community, and we get the law enforcement community. But at the end of the day, we're going to have to talk to elected officials, as annoying as that sometimes may be, if we're going to change the laws to make American immigration policy successful. And as a result, we're going to have to talk in terms that matter to them. The most important thing that an elected official has to ask when you explain to them you'd like them to support a particular initiative is whether it's safe. Okay? If I walk out, is the ice thick enough? And people really, it's interesting to know that it's good policy, okay? But you don't really get to the conversation about how swell your policy is if you can't convince an elected official that first they can get past the next election having advocated your swell policy. Most people are just not up. That's a really great idea, and it'll cost me the next election a small price to pay for doing what you asked me to do. That's not the approach. The people who take that approach are wonderful allies for 16 months before they lose the next election. But we really do need to walk through how they can stand for reasonable, inclusive, comprehensive immigration reform and get reelected. And I want to argue today that it's not only good policy to have more immigrants in the United States, dramatically more immigrants than we do today, to having a path forward for those people who are here. It's not only a good idea, but it's good politics. And let me start by suggesting that we've seen the opposite. We've seen that restrictionist policies, never mind passing them, advocating them, are bad electoral politics. There's this idea somehow that when you get some people all excited and chatting on talk radio, that makes for a powerful political issue, okay? Some issues move votes, some issues move tongues. There are issues that people will talk about all day that do not necessarily, at the end of the day, swing their vote. I would argue that people vote on primary vote-moving issues. I work within the center-right, and if you want to know who's in the center-right coalition, we put together 150 people in a room about this size every Wednesday for an hour and a half, as if around a big table, but we have sort of stadium seating so everybody can see everybody's eyes. And when I want to think through who's in the room, who's in the Reagan Republican coalition, and therefore at some point how do you talk to them about immigration, they're there on their vote-moving issue. Taxpayers, don't raise my taxes. Gun owners, leave my Second Amendment rights alone. These are people who vote as taxpayers, who vote as gun owners. Not every gun owner votes on the gun issue, but the ones who do simply wish to be left alone in that zone. They do not insist that every fourth-grade child in public school be taught books entitled Heather Has Two Hunters, Sarah Palin's new book. But they wish to be left alone in that zone. Homeschoolers, leave me alone. They don't knock on your door and tell you to homeschool. All the various communities of faith wish to be left alone to practice their faith, transmit it to their children. They're not asking for Baptist stamps. They don't want the government to outlaw Episcopalianism. They simply wish to be left alone, which is how and why evangelical Protestants, conservative Catholics, Orthodox Jews, Muslims, and Mormons can all work together in support of religious liberty, even though they know the guy at the other side of the table is going straight to Hades because he completely misunderstands Scripture. But if I'm going to make it to heaven, we're going to have a free society, which means some other people are going to misunderstand things. So around the table in the center right, people are there, property rights people, on their vote-moving issue. Now, if you get to secondary issues and tertiary issues and quaternary issues and whatever 5 is, okay, you can have some knockdown, drag-out fights. And this is what Pat Buchanan, former President Pat Buchanan and former President Tom Tancredo, discovered when they said, you know, we've done some polling. 70% of the American people think there are too many immigrants, okay, which has been true ever since the Germans started sneaking in the early 1700s. But, you know, 70% think there are too many immigrants, okay. They didn't ask this, and the other thing is 70% think we're trading too much with China, okay. So I'm going to stake out those 2 positions and win 70% of the vote, and that I'm the nominee, and then I win the presidency. Done. He didn't ask a second question. Having asked people, do you think there happen to be too many immigrants in the country? Yes, yes, yes. Do you care? Do you vote on that issue? Or do you vote on other issues? Okay? Because people can go on talk radio and talk for the longest time about immigration. But at the end of the day, Pat Buchanan got maybe 1% of the vote. Tom Tancredo, not that, okay? We've had some examples where people who thought they had the silver bullet, the key to the kingdom, because so many people came up and told me they loved my speech. How many votes do you need to be a congressman in this district? And really count how many people came up and told you that, okay? 12, but it seemed like a lot, okay? And again, this is not my wish that it's not a vote-moving issue, that restrictionism is not a vote-moving issue. I would argue that if you look at the history of both the Republican and the Democratic primaries, going back at least to Reagan, the most immigrant-friendly candidate running as the Republican, in the Republican primary and the Democratic primary, won in each case. We ended up with John McCain, for his, in my view, multiple flaws on other issues, was the Republican nominee in 2008, and the one most associated with a comprehensive immigration proposal and supposedly not nominatable by the modern Republican Party, except he was. Okay. It's like the physicists who can prove to you that bumblebees can't fly, except they do. And the counterpart to that, and Richard Nadler, people here read Richard Nadler's works on the 2006-2008 election. I'll email them to you if anybody wants them, but he goes district by district, all the border districts, all the districts where immigration played a role, and the people who supported comprehensive immigration reform defeated regularly, overwhelmingly, the people who were for a enforce the law proposal. This is the deport everyone that you run into now position. I always get a kick out of conservatives who think, first thing we should do is enforce the immigration laws. I said, well, don't you think we should reform them and make them more sensible before you go and enforce them? No, no, we're law-abiding. First thing you do is enforce these laws. I said, what was your attitude when we had a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit in the country? Was the conservative position that first we arrest all of this illegal driving thing going on, and then when we've locked up everybody who drives more than 55 miles an hour speed, we can then have a conversation about whether 55 mile an hour makes sense? Or did we instead say, let's have a reasonable speed limit and then decide to enforce the law? And I think Montana is the only one that came up with the reasonable speed limit, which was none. But the answer was we need a 55 is too low, we need a higher number, and you don't start by enforcing a dumb law. You start by making the law more sensible. You can't ask for respect for the law if you're threatening to arrest soccer moms who have to get from one place to another in 55 miles an hour driving across Kansas. Doesn't make a lot of sense. On the politics of it, I think we need to speak to politicians to walk through with them. And again, the 2 Nadler studies on 2006, 2008 simply walk through district by district. People who, Republicans who said had been for comprehensive and had been winning in districts with significant Hispanic voter groups in their districts, switched because they thought it was clever to enforce the law rather than comprehensive, and lost to a Democrat who was for comprehensive. Now, a Democrat may have talked a lot about building walls somewhere, but they weren't for deporting anyone. and the idea, and they didn't hear the difference between let's have a comprehensive fix and build a wall, because everybody you're talking to would be on this side of the wall. Okay, you're not threatening them, even if you build a wall that may or may not be terribly useful or effective. But deport your sister, if we catch her, is a little more to the moment than the Democrat who wanted to build a wall. Getting this wrong is not just a question of Republicans losing a great number of House seats in 2006 and 2008. Now, 2008, bad economic year. 2006, if one remembers, was a strong year, strong economic year. The economy was going great. 4 years of growth in a row. No reason to be unhappy with your congressman over simply the economy. And yet we lost a great number of seats where you can see the dramatic shift on the issue of immigration reform, and the people who had once supported comprehensive and went to enforcement only lost. So we've tested this in recent. Or we can go back in time to when our friend Samuel Burkhardt made the comment sorry. Exactly. Sam Burkhardt, we Republicans, and do not propose to leave our party and identify ourselves with the party whose antecedents have been Romanism and rebellion. That was 1884. Took the Republican Party 110 years. 110 years to win the Catholic vote. Pretty stupid. Sorry. How do these guys not hear themselves when they talk like this? I always thought that was some minister in a cave somewhere. This was, Sam Burkhardt was addressing the Religious Bureau of the Republican National Committee. Okay? So he was with the RNC, with the Religious Bureau. You talk that way about Catholics at the Religious Bureau. I don't imagine there were a lot of Catholics in the room. You wonder about who else was allowed in that room. And yet he felt free to talk like that. And for 110 years, people were losing elections. So we maybe get offended at what he said. We need to talk to politicians who only hear 110 years of lost elections. Because it's not easy sometimes to shake people up. But if they understand this is about losing elections, as well as being an annoying person, that we need to walk our way through that. So, look, this is a key issue. If the modern Republican Party or the modern Democratic Party, and the Democrats can end up getting this just as wrong as Republicans. For years they did. Most of the people I fought with over the years, we'd put together these pro-immigration discussions, and the guys we were actually arguing were with the AFL-CIO, who had the no-immigrant position. I actually had problems once. We were working with a bunch of youth groups, and we tried to get everybody to sign up on being in favor of Soviet Jews leaving the Soviet Union, and the union representatives didn't want to do that because that might imply we'd let them in here. We were just talking about letting people leave. No. See, if you let them leave, they might end up here. And their party line that they'd been given is we don't let people show up here. And they wanted to limit that. The shutting down of the Braceros program, which gave us a guest worker program that worked for a deal of time, not only in terms of getting willing workers to willing employers, but also to largely ending the problem of illegal migration across the border, which is, in 54 million people got arrested trying to cross the border. 10 years later, it was down to 100,000. The problem became much less dramatic because people who wanted to come across and work were able to come across and work. Pat Buchanan didn't get to be president. Tom Tancredo, sitting in his monochromatic congressional district, was not able to run statewide. The 06 and 08 elections both tell the story of comprehensive reform defeating the other. Now, there's this fiction that you get sometimes from some of the guys I hear, they say, oh, well, Grover, we're going to go talk to Hispanic voters about being pro-life and for traditional marriage and all these other issues that they're going to agree with us on. I said, let me get this straight. You're going to walk up to a guy and say, why don't you and I talk about all these issues that that mattered us? And while my friend Igor here goes up and takes your aunt and drags her down the stairs and throws her across the border. But don't let that get in the way of the wonderful conversation we're having about capital gains tax cuts. And since you're a small businessman, you would agree with us on that. And we should really focus on that and not your neighbors that are disappearing. You can't get to other issues if you've got that elephant in the room. And so this fantasy that one can set this issue aside, have a few elections about other issues, if you guys would just agree to do that, and then we'll get back and we can focus on the other when we're ready to think through the other thing. It is going to require leadership, but I think it has to be grassroots leadership. I think people has to be told it's safe. People have to hear that the business community cares. 1999, I was at a meeting at the Republican National Committee, and maybe 30 of the major trade associations in town, all the big ones, and me, the taxpayer guy, with the head of the Republican Party. And he said, well, I'm here for my annual meeting of transactionally pretending to listen, so what's important to you guys? And everybody went around the room and they said capital gains, trial lawyers, capital gains, trial lawyers, and again and again and again. And it was a lovely conversation. We do this every year. And then he got up and said, thank you very much, I've learned a lot, and was leaving. And like that second to the last scene in the Colombo murder mysteries, the guy from the Chamber of Commerce said, well, there is this one other thing. Oh, what's that? He turns around. And he says, well, we're running out of people. And we don't know how to deal with this because we've never worked on immigration issues, and we don't know if we're allowed to. It's like that cartoon, Far Side cartoon, with the flaming arrows are coming into the cavalrymen in the fort, and one cavalryman says to the other, the Indians are lighting their arrows on fire. Can they do that? He didn't know, can we do this? Are we allowed to talk about immigration? And around that table for the next 10 minutes, the truckers, the restaurateurs, every single guy said, well, actually, that's the biggest issue we face. And we're short people, we're short trained people, but we just are short people. And if the economy keeps growing, luckily we fixed that, but if the economy keeps going, we're really going to be in trouble here. But they all sat there like bumps on the log going, this is the biggest issue, but they only barely brought it up. They didn't really fundamentally organize to get it fixed other than to write a couple of letters to Congress. So there are some very, very real opportunities in the business community, not just the small business guys, but the big trade associations that you think of as having they need to be talking to congressmen. The various communities of faith need to make it clear. So that people here out at the grassroots level, elected officials here, because they can turn on this. They've seen the opposite work poorly. Okay, we've got examples of people who crashed and burned running on Tom Tancredo's strategy. We've seen people do better the other way, but what they do need to hear is that there's popular support for that, and we also need to walk down and say, look, some people conflate a whole bunch of other things and project it onto the immigration issue. So you've got the population control people who don't like any people. They're not bigots, they don't like people. And then you've got people worried about welfare, okay? And I had this argument with leading conservative leader. He said, Grover, we have to limit immigration. I said, why? And he said, because they'll come over on the border and they'll get on welfare and then this would be bad. And I said, so you think we have a welfare problem? Well, yes, but we can't reform welfare, but the best thing we could do is stop more people getting on it. And I said, look, welfare destroys a lot of lives. Most of the lives that it destroys are people who are born in this country, and let's work on reforming it, as Clinton signed the reform in '96. He didn't, if Clinton had said, here's a bill to be mean to Hispanics, it would never have wouldn't have passed through Congress. You wouldn't have signed it. It was a welfare reform bill to make welfare for anyone and everybody more effective, done at the local level, done at the state level, and dramatically reduced costs and dramatically reduced the incentives to get trapped into welfare dependency. A much better approach than California's 187, which tried to sell itself as welfare reform for them. And everybody heard the second part of the conversation and realized what was at stake. Then there's the assimilation question, which is really a question of education. Okay, we got 4 million immigrants a year that are born here. They're called babies. They don't speak English very well at all. I have one that's 3 and one that's 4. They're really not self-supporting in any meaningful sense. And, you know, there's a lifetime of education that goes into preparing those people to become citizens. And we act as if that somebody who comes from Korea has got more of a handicap, you know, at age 25 coming over than the person who shows up as a newborn. We have to have an education system and structures that turn people into Americans every single generation. You know, it's not inherited. You have to do it again every generation, new people. And it's not new or different with immigrants. It's just like with everybody else, and we've done it many times. And the other thing is to remember that we keep saying it, you know, we're a nation of immigrants, but it's like really true. And we've been through this again and again and again. And everyone always goes, well, all the old immigrants that we're used to, whose names we can now pronounce, okay, they're okay. It's these new guys that are annoying and causing problems, you know, except that that's what everybody said. And I think it is important to remember that a lot of people remember back years, and when they hear someone picking on today's immigrants, they kind of suspect you're also thinking about me now. So with those thoughts, I think this is completely doable, where I've got a lot of chaff and a lot of clatter and a lot of nonsense out there where people think it's a deadly situation. And I know from the Republicans, you know, the Republicans had 10 people running for president this last time around. Well, 10 people on stage. Some of them were doing marriage counseling. Some of them were running for radio talk show host. They're, you know, some of them are getting exercise, but a couple of them were actually running for president. And I was surprised that even some of those guys went way off the edge on the immigration issue in a self-destructive way. And they're not foolish people. They believed that this was sound policy. Although when you talk to their policy guys, they knew better than that. That somehow they knew in general elections this didn't work, but they believed that it might be a key issue in primaries, except we just did have a big primary in Arizona after McCain didn't get to be president. He ran in 10, and in Arizona, right, which is supposed to be a hotbed of hostility towards immigrants, the Republicans chose the immigrant-friendly candidate and not the challenger who ran largely on that issue. We have tested this issue again and again and again. It's not like 10 times we win, 10 times they win. These dice are fixed, guys. I mean, the pro-immigrant, pro-comprehensive position keeps winning on this. And so we're in a very good position to educate staff, candidates. The talking heads are the problem because, again, their market is just the guys listening on radio who call in, okay? You don't need 51% of the people listening to you on talk radio to make a living. You need 51% of the vote to win, but you can get rich if 10% of the country is listening to you on the radio. So that causes a challenge and confuses small children and elected officials as to how popular or important an issue is. Thoughts, comments, arguments? Yes, sorry, sir. Yeah. Got a mic here?
Is it on? Yes. Grover, singing several times in Washington. But Grover, I agree exactly what you're saying. Give you several cases in point. That's why we cannot get Chinese Americans because of 1882. The Republicans did this with Chesterfield also. This is why we lost for 50 some years until about 1969, 70 with the rise in that turn. It's when Irish Catholics went Democratic. It's the same thing when they brought in the Eastern Europeans from Poland, Hungary, and they went into Chicago, they went into South Bend. Why did they all become Democratic? Because the Republicans said they were not a part of us. They didn't go, they weren't Protestants. They were the Catholics. And you're absolutely saying, it's like the Republicans have a death wish. And you're right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we're going to make the same mistake we don't seem to learn.
Yeah, because of that, and because I think the evidence is so clear that it's not a vote, hostility to immigration per se, and hostility to immigrants is a vote losing, not a vote winning issue, that I think we can begin to turn things around. And frankly, for a Republican who wants to turn it around, the Ds haven't done anything because organized labor doesn't want them to. So they got this bone stuck in their throat on their own side. Yeah.
Grover, there's a lot of pundits out there, but Limbaugh in particular is probably the worst. And you've seen how he's gone after Lindsey Graham and what have you. Nobody within the party has felt the strength to take him on personally. And when somebody does, they always back down and apologize for having done so.
Well, again, Limbaugh's a radio talk show host, and he'll tell you he's an entertainer. I mean, he says this when asked, okay? He's not a political strategist. He's not an elected official. Look, Lindsey Graham wants to steal your money and raise your taxes and give stuff to the trial lawyers. So there are plenty of reasons to be mad at Lindsey Graham. The fact that he's for a comprehensive reform of immigration is not one of them. But you're right. There are talk radio show hosts who have fun with some of this stuff and at other people's expense. I mean, this is bullying with a microphone. Yeah.
Could you talk a bit about the ball? It seems that we put a lot of money into that for reasons that you've described. Why does that resonate so much with John McCain and Chuck Schumer at the same time?
The one thing you do get from polling and from political discussions, people do want a sense of secure borders. Okay, I think the wall does that. I don't know how much a wall does the secure border thing, but if that's part of somebody's peace of mind, if the borders are secure, now we can have a conversation about bringing significant number of brilliant engineers into the United States. And allowing people to come who want to work on farms and in the hospitality industry. If you have to do that to get to the next conversation, Schumer does it, and McCain does it, and then you move on. I'm not big on walls, but if that, I don't know that that's the way to secure the border, but it's a small price to pay if that's what you have to pay, to have a rational conversation about how big the doors should be, okay, in the wall.
Do you think we do have to pay that price because of the ball?
There are a lot of politicians who, if they feel they could look people in the eye and say, we are securing the border as well as we can, okay, and long border and all that stuff, and now let's have a rational conversation about immigration. Now, what you get from the dishonest restrictionists is once you've closed the border so that no one ever gets across a several thousand-mile border and ports and airplanes and stuff like that, then we'll have a conversation about the number of immigrants that should be able to come in legally. Okay, that's a trap because you'll never get to zero tolerance on border crossing. So I worry about the trade-off, first this and then that. That gets to be a problem because the opponents of a comprehensive, serious solution where we need more immigrants in the country, both low-skilled as guest workers and or to come and stay, and guys, I mean, we should be, I spoke 2 weekends ago in Rabat, Morocco, at one of these German Marshall Fund things debating some Bolshevik about who should be president. And we had this conversation, and the Europeans go, well, what do you think we should do? Because we've spent all this money and we have these so entitlements are going bankrupt and the euro is falling apart. And I said, emigrate. So we got some takers. But the, there's a world of people out there who want to, who are highly skilled, want to be free, love to come here. There's no reason they should be stuck in France. That's not fair to do to people. And so we should be more open on all those levels. But some people want to say, well, until you build the pyramids or a wall, we're not going to talk about the other thing. As long as you don't end up with first this, then that, it may be what you need to do to make people feel comfortable. And it will stop some bad people. You know, it's not nothing. You know, some fences in San Diego made life a lot easier for the police, you know. Yes?
Yeah, Mr. Norquist, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to help develop a pro-market-based comprehensive immigration reform pledge, the way that you very effectively with your No New Taxes pledge.
Okay, first of all, there's only one pledge. That's the no tax increase pledge. We may come up with a commitment, we may come up with any number of things, but we are not going to dilute the trademark here. And the only thing I'd say is on that, the reason the taxpayer protection pledge, you know, I promise not to raise taxes, works is it's simple. It's a sentence. It's easily understood. It doesn't change. It's been around 25 years in 50 states, and everybody knows what it means. Something like immigration reform has so many moving parts that where you would give, if somebody said, well, could we give everybody who comes over with a PhD in engineering, this, that, and the other thing, if we built another 2 miles of wall? Well, yeah, I'd take that. I mean, so there's so many trade-offs that you would do in that aren't the end of a conversation in immigration. But there's a bill, a concept, you know, these are the 3 pieces to the puzzle, something like that, that I think we could come up with. And you kind of have to do that if you're going to explain to Republicans and Democrats. Because, I mean, one of the reasons the Democrats won't do this is not just because the AFL-CIO is standing behind them with a baseball bat. The other reason is they think the Republican could sneak around to their right, even in some of their districts, and they're right. It drives me nuts when people refer to it, but to the more restrictionist position and beat them in an election. So both R's and D's need, let's have a secure border. Let's bring all the highly trained guys over so they can start computer companies, okay? I mean, I don't know if people have seen this. I just spent this last weekend with Vivek Wadhwa, who wrote The Immigration Exodus, which is all about how well we've done with immigration and how we're not doing as well. With the highly talented Silicon Valley immigration stuff, half of the new startups are founded by immigrants, a quarter of the startups and high-tech startups in the country. You know, this is very important stuff. And this is, everybody saw Steve Jobs' rather rough comments on Barack Obama. I mean, he went to Barack Obama when he was still alive and said, if you let me bring in enough engineers with H-1B visas and let them be here, I can start up all these factories across the country. And Barack Obama gave him this, and he decided, you're an idiot, and walked out the door. But it was, for him, it was you don't get it. This is jobs. And Obama had other fish to fry, unions to deal with, wasn't willing to take that easy step. And it was very frustrating for Steve Jobs, who wasn't able to make any progress there. So there's not a pledge, but I do think we need a 4-part. You need to teach candidates how to talk about something. This is what Paul Ryan, with his Ryan plan on the budget, he wouldn't let anyone co-sponsor his bill until he'd sat down with them and felt they understood it well enough that if somebody stuck a microphone in front of him and asked him about it, they wouldn't embarrass him by winging it. We need to do the same thing with our candidates, make sure they feel comfortable so that they don't, because if you send them out there half prepared and they get wrapped around the axle, they'll never forgive you for pushing them out into traffic on that. So if not a pledge, a paragraph that they can understand and articulate. Yes?
Mr. Norquist, thank you for coming today. Just a brief question in terms of helping us frame this. One of the things, I'm in Illinois, and one of the things we hear a lot about is the undocumented question. I understand what you're saying about the job creators. But the undocumented are here right now. They broke the law. They are illegal. Help us frame that issue in terms of a response that we can use. A lot of people, I represent the Catholic Church in the state of Illinois, and so, you know, many people of faith they're rule followers, you know, we have commandments and legitimately. And that's a hard argument sometimes. We can handle that in some ways, but I'd like to hear your comments about how do we answer that question about they broke the law and they're rule breakers.
Yeah, I think on that one, it's like you want to secure the border, have some penalty for having broken the law, and then move on. But not every penalty is the death penalty, and not everything time people break the law, they go to jail necessarily. So pay a fine, something along those, because I do think for making the sale politically, I think the sense that somebody jumped in line does seem to resonate with people. Okay, so if you said, for citizenship, you get in line as if you'd just shown up in the embassy and asked, but you can stay here and work, but pay a fine because you did something wrong, and now get back to work and your family, and let's move forward. But there is a sense that resonates with people. On the other hand, parking tickets, speeding tickets, they're all against the law. These are laws people are breaking when they speed. These are not advisory notices. They're breaking the law. They'll go to jail too. What do we do with people who speed? Lots of people sped in the 70s and 80s and 90s and never paid a penalty for it. We're going to allow them to have amnesty on all that speeding? Really? Yeah, really, we are. But I think something that signifies, yes, you broke the law, that wasn't good, but we don't throw people out of the country for breaking the law.
You talked about earlier that this had to come grassroots to Washington. But somebody has to be on Capitol Hill to grab the ball. Who is there to do that?
Well, on the left, you used to have Ted Kennedy, who was focused on this. On the right-hand side, Jack Kemp was always... we always got the same gang together for these press conferences every time. Somebody mentioned we have a problem with Afghan interpreters who need to come to the United States now because they can't stick around in Afghanistan after the war. We went through the same thing with Iraqi interpreters who were just leaving over there. And, you know, they put themselves at risk for us, and they was, bye, we're leaving, sorry. Anyway, we got that one legislatively fixed. Now I understand there's a new challenge with Afghanistan. But whenever that happened, you'd put together largely the same coalition of people who were somewhat focused on this. We need to broaden it. We need, when something like that happens, to get the Chamber of Commerce, which understands, our team needs to see the immigration issue as a whole. And every step forward, these are all pieces that fit together. And when you've explained one thing on why we should have a more generous, open immigration position here, that helps you in these other zones as well. And that's part of building a coalition. And right now we don't have that. We have some trade associations going, call me when there's a farm bill. But they're not there for some of the other conversations. And so we need more of our guys who think of this holistically rather than in their own particular zone. Because you're always a better spokesman in somebody else's issue than the one that's obviously yourself benefit. I'd like to do this, it's good for me. Well, yeah, we assumed as much. I'd like to do this, it's good for the country. And it may show the country why they should do this other thing later that's good for me. That's just a much easier sale politically. Alec.
Well, can we take a second to thank Grover very much? And, well, first of all, my name is Ali Noorani. I'm the Executive Director of the National Immigration Forum, and I just wanted to take a minute to underline what Mark was saying about Grover's desire, ability, commitment to reaching out, to engaging other cultures, other communities, other issues, so that not only those issues move forward, but the issues that all of us care about in the country that we all live in moves forward. So I really want to thank Grover for taking a day out of his incredibly busy schedule to join us here in Indianapolis. And I think what we have here is the beginning of a grassroots movement. I wouldn't even say it's a beginning, it's the continuation of a grassroots movement to push for immigration reform. So Grover, thank you. And let's take a 5-minute break.
I'd just like to invite folks to start making their way back in. Is this okay if I get started? Come in and take your seat so we can get on with the law enforcement panel. Thank you. Oh, you do?
You have to let me introduce you. Come on. Yeah, I said you have to let me introduce you, and he's fighting it, but I think we're going to be okay. You heading back today?
Have state soccer tournament with my daughter tomorrow.
Oh.
Second round.
Yep.
And it's in southern, it's a 3-hour drive down to where we're playing.
Wow.
But I was going to wait and come back tomorrow. Now I got to be back tonight so we can leave in the morning.
Yeah.
So short, quick trip this time, unfortunately.
Okay.
I got my water. These are panel members.
We're going to go ahead and get started. If everyone can take their seats. And the law enforcement panel, we'd like to invite you up to the stage, please. Get to your seat. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Next is the long-awaited panel of the day, for me anyway. I am really excited to get to introduce some wonderful people that are here with us today and have done so much to support the issue of immigration reform and really have stood out as examples and courageous leaders on the issue. And I would like to introduce Attorney General of Utah, Mark Shurtleff, who has had many accomplishments while serving as Attorney General, which include establishing Utah's Amber Alert, the first statewide child abduction response team, and identity theft database. He previously served as an officer and attorney in the U.S. Navy Judge Advocate General, JAG Corps, Assistant Attorney General, and Deputy County Attorney for Salt Lake County. His service has been recognized with many awards, including the 2005 Utah Protector of Children Award, the 2006 Humanitarian of the Year Award, and the Order of the Aztec Eagle. And on a personal note, I just want to say I have admired your work from afar. Here in Indiana, another idea that we stole from Utah is the Utah Compact. And so I from afar, very much admired the work that Utah has done on this issue, and we actually did our own version of the Utah Compact here in Indiana called the Indiana Compact, which helped us a great deal last legislative session to manage to water down a very nasty immigration bill. And also want to say a special word of thanks to our own Indiana Attorney General Greg Zeller, who's here on the panel today, who also has been a very courageous leader in this area and has faced a tough battle this year with regard to this issue. So thank you very much to both of you for being leaders. And with that, go ahead.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you. Good to be with you here today. And there was a question or two of Grover Norquist dealing with this issue that we all face, and that is a constant refrain from the anti-immigration folks, the Tea Party, the Minutemen, and so forth, and that is, what don't you understand about illegal, right? We get that all the time. Illegal is illegal. We're a rule of law nation. And how can you, Attorney General Shurtleff, not be supportive of rounding them up and shipping them all out? If the federal government won't do their job, you're a law enforcement official in Utah, it's your job to do it. And if you won't do it, the chief needs to do it, and the sheriff needs to do it. And we're here to say today, obviously, that most law enforcement are not Joe Arpaio. Most law enforcement are very dedicated and committed to their sworn duty, and that is to uphold the law, the Constitution of the United States and the laws and constitutions of our respective states. That's what we're sworn to do. And so how does this play into it when you have this movement of people saying we need to toughen up the laws to get people to self-deport or to round them up and deport them ourselves? By cracking down with really strict law enforcement related laws like Arizona 1070 and other states that came after. And how does law enforcement feel about that? Well, in Utah, as soon as 1070 passed and suddenly the right wing of my party, and we're Utah just north of Arizona, They ran out and said, we're going to get all the people from Arizona up here now, and we have to do exactly the same thing in Utah. We in law enforcement, initially, that's who I was talking to. I wasn't yet talking to the chambers and the faith-based communities. It was about, wait a minute, we don't want, our officers, the vast majority, do not want to become ICE agents. This is not our responsibility. We're very busy doing our job. Not only that, ultimately we feel, in a way, and you're going to hear this, I think, today, hopefully, that I heard, that in fact, these type of laws, these punitive, run-them-out laws, are actually harmful to overall public safety, and hopefully we'll talk a little bit about that today. And so we in law enforcement got very busy and then engaged with other like-minded people like we have here today to change that mentality in Utah and to go from this tough enforcement-only kind of approach to back off on that, and if we're going to do something, let's try more comprehensive, pragmatic, reasonable, compassionate solutions and Utah Compact. And we're just glad to see this thing spreading. And so today, it's a great honor for me to, by the way, I'm 12 years now as Attorney General almost, and I'm finishing in a few months. I love this job. Greg, is it a great job? I should say General. It's a wonderful opportunity, and I think the greatest honor I've had is working with men and women in law enforcement in the state of Utah and throughout this country with their dedicated service. So it's an honor to introduce, and I'm not going to go through their bios because you have them right here, but to my immediate left is Sheriff Mark Curran from Lake County, Illinois. I will say that he has served in criminal justice at the local, county, state, and federal levels, and can give you that perspective. And then seated obviously in the middle is Attorney General Greg Zeller. He was the chief deputy. I knew him as Steve Carter's chief deputy. Steve Carter and I came in as AGs together. Got to know the guys who, and we all know as AGs who really does the work. That's our chief deputies and folks under us. And so it was, Greg moved right in 4 years ago, and not only as a leader in the state, but he is well known nationally and regionally for leadership on big issues, most recently being a huge leader nationwide on this issue of child sexual slavery. And so I really, really appreciate, and he's taught me about hospitality here, I'll tell you that. And finally on the left we have Chief James Hawkins from Garden City, Kansas. A lifetime career in law enforcement from a street officer on the street all the way up through significant training and education to now I think 15 or 16 years, something like that, as chief of police. So with that, I've asked each one of them, let's just start right here with you, Sheriff, just a brief kind of statement about law enforcement related matters when it comes to immigration reform. Thank you.
Let me just say that I was at one time on the other side of the issue. I had applied for 287G status, had been a prosecutor at the county, state, and federal level, believed very much in the rule of law, and thought, the law is the law, and ultimately somebody has to enforce it. Otherwise, our nation has no hope. But as I delved deeper into the situation and I saw that essentially the law wasn't enforced forever, we needed the labor force, so we had wide open borders, and we had no interest. And then all of a sudden, after years of people coming into this country, we wanted to deport them and break up families. Well, let me just say this much. I'm somebody that believes that your faith should carry over in all of the roles that you have in life, including as sheriff. So if I believe in the sanctity of human life, I want a consistent ethic of life, including how I treat immigrants. I want to be equitable in that process. If I believe in a nuclear family, then I don't want to arbitrarily break up a mother and a father that are trying to raise their children. And so as I dealt with these issues, I didn't like myself on the other side of the issue because I knew all the truths were on the side of embracing immigration reform, moving in that direction, and being fair about it.
General?
Well, I'll say the immigration debate was not something that I sought out, but it came to our state. And it's one that, a bill was proposed, and I respect the fact that, the failure of the federal government, we can all agree, has led us to this position. And we noted that there were hundreds of bills in states around the country where states were looking at what is our responsibility with the failure of the federal government. So I've never been critical of the states in engaging in this, but some of the real questions, the constitutional questions, particularly the one that really stuck out was the warrantless arrest power, which, again, my role as Attorney General, particularly with the legislators, is to give counsel behind closed doors. And I've never in my career spoke publicly on a subject that was subject to a legislative debate against a bill. And I didn't in this one, but in standing up for the compact, it was represented that I was against what's now Senate Bill 590. But what I always pointed out is that the reason that I thought it was important to stand up was not to object to a bill being introduced. I would never have to want to object to something that I may, and in this case am, defending in court. But to stand up for something else was really meant to focus on one specific thing. All of the efforts to go around to states, very concerted efforts to bring the enforcement issue to state legislators, really misrepresented to the public at large that these debates should be taking on a state nature instead of keeping the focus where it should be, which is the federal government, who has tried desperately to avoid the subject. So the reason I felt it was my obligation to stand up for something else, not against the bill that I'm defending, but I was for keeping the focus where it rightly belongs and is constitutionally structured to be the Congress, which has all failed us miserably. So the men and women in law enforcement deserve better than to be put in front of the bus when in fact that bus should be aimed right at Congress.
Thank you. Chief?
Well, I feel obligated to tell you where Garden City, Kansas is, because most of you probably are saying, where the hell is that?
It's the garden spot.
We are 83 miles south of I-70. We are 70 miles east of the Colorado border, 70 miles north of the Oklahoma border, and 70 miles west of a little village that claims to be the boyhood home of the discoverer of Pluto, and you all know how that worked out. Garden City is roughly 55% Hispanic now. I am not a native of Garden City, nor of Kansas, so I think I can look at it a little more objectively than some. But it's about 55% Hispanic now. We have the school district reports to speak 23 different languages, and in a community of 30,000 documented residents, I think that's pretty significant. So these immigration issues do affect us. We are hugely diverse when it comes to ethnicity, and we as a police department think that everybody should be treated fairly, equitably, regardless of your immigration status.
Chief, thank you. That actually leads into my first question for you. By the way, if you have questions, you can either write them down and let Carter over there, the Hook'em Horns guy, Pat, to pick them up, and we'll make sure we get your questions in if we can. That is this question of policing. You know, there was only 20, 30, 40 years ago, the theory of policing was, hey, folks, stay in your house and lock your doors. We, the cops, will keep you safe. And obviously, that wasn't working as well as when they started this concept of community policing, where the officers are in the community, you get to know who you're dealing with, the demographics, the people, get their trust, and then get their help and cooperation. And so my question, I guess, is to this, and maybe, if, again, going into some of your demographics and so forth, what harm you see a enforcement-only, tough, punitive-type law will do to either the idea of community-oriented policing or just the concept of general public safety in your communities? Whoever wants to start, go for it. General, you look like you may want to have something.
I'll start. I think you know, the state of Indiana is not the same throughout our 92 counties. Much like all the other states, there's quite a bit of regional and specific differences. So the law enforcement being put into this awkward position really are going to go in two different directions. I mean, some in communities that have large immigrant populations and may have a large presence of immigrants on the law enforcement force itself would take one approach, and then you'd have the approach in where there's a much less population of immigrants, or let's say it's all a homogenous kind of. So you'll end up putting law enforcement into the position where they will be constantly challenged for having racially profiled a defendant. They'll constantly be challenged in court and under valid constitutional claims that they had discriminated based on what they saw the nature of the defendant, so his race, his ethnic origin. You're going to put this constant claim in front of the public every day. And I think it really does, again, it's this disservice to the men and women who protect and defend us to be in that position where they're going to constantly be challenged, on the one hand being duty bound to do what they're told, on the other every day to have to read in the newspaper and get the word out to the communities that they serve that they're somehow being discriminatory in the exercise of enforcement of law. It's untenable.
Thank you.
I would
Sheriff?
say, essentially, I'm Irish, there's a Celtic saying, never give a man a sword until you teach him how to dance. You don't want police walking around with a chip on their shoulders, this is the law, hostility towards immigrant groups, and you set the tone by being the sheriff. And when you're out there saying, things that they can interpret as having a harsh position towards certain groups, they're going to follow suit. So you want to be very, very careful with that. Also, having been of Irish ancestry, I can tell you what the Irish were like when my ancestors came here early in the 20th century, that they were stuck together. I mean, they knew each other in the old country and they stuck together here. It's similar with today's immigrant groups. So if they think the police is out there to get them, that they're unfair, that they're just arbitrarily grabbing people and putting them in holding cells so they can get sent back and broken up from their family, then there will be no relations. And if you really want to keep the larger communities safe as well, you have to have community policings, as General Shurtleff said. You have to have that ability to walk in there, have a relationship with these people. Well, they'll tell you where the bad guy is, or where he went, or what they saw, or who did what. And that's critical, I think, in terms of the larger picture.
I agree. I think that you have to establish a positive relationship with your community, or you are not going to be able to solve the crimes and issues. When I first moved to Garden City, the major population was Caucasian, non-Hispanic, but there were a lot of Hispanics who had been coming in since the early 1900s. We had about a 5% Asian population at the time. There were Vietnamese, Lao, Cambodians, and they were a very difficult group to gain confidence with because they felt, and they came from a country where the police wasn't respected, and so we worked very, very hard to gain their respect and gain their confidence so that they would in turn report crimes that your average longtime citizen felt no compunction about reporting. And to undo that now after 30 years would be disastrous, I think.
Let me say from our own experience in Utah, because we do support the rule of law, and we have some criminal aliens in our states who are here to commit crime. And they're gang bangers or drug dealers, human traffickers, gun dealers. I mean, we know they're manufacturing meth. They're illegal, they're criminal, they commit crimes, and those are the ones who are making our entire populations unsafe. So we formed a strike force called the Criminal Alien Strike Force and got funding for it to just go after those bad people. And I'll tell you, 90% of our confidential informants are also otherwise undocumented immigrants because they live in these neighborhoods, they know these people, they're the first ones to be victimized, and so they want to cooperate, they want to clean up their streets, they want to cooperate with law enforcement, but all acting very nervous that if my officers or the county deputies, sheriffs, or city police are working on our strike force are suddenly now ICE agents, they won't talk to them anymore. And that's a grave concern. Now, there's a follow-up question here by a member of the audience here about what is the right level of local cooperation with ICE? 287G. I mean, what is the cooperation, and what is, in your opinion, the right amount of that type of collaboration?
Well, I would say that it's at this point where we have a broken system that nobody has any interest in fixing, it is at a bare minimum. You do as little as you're absolutely required to. You don't apply for any special task forces. You don't, other than the bare minimum that you're mandated to do. That's, in my opinion, you wouldn't want to go beyond it, because you want to force the hand of those out there that we have immigration reform. And as long as there's mass deportations in huge numbers, there's no incentive.
Jump right in if you.
Well, the one part that on the warrantless arrests, we have taken a position on that deals with the ICE. When there's a federal hold out there, we still maintain the right that our law enforcement should hold the defendants pending an ICE review, because we do think that there's an obligation on the part of law enforcement if and when there's been federal action. So there's an open question as to whether there still has to be a warrant issued, but I think we're willing to take the next step to say even where there's a 24-hour hold, we'll at least do that, which again, I know it offends some sense of individual liberties to be held pending a federal review. But we'll still maintain that level of it. Again, it's still going to be subject to a court review.
And I think that if a serious felony is committed and the suspect is incarcerated, then we can check into their status as just a matter of course in the investigation. Your average traffic stop, I don't really care whether or not you're a citizen, whether you're here legally or illegally. What I care about is, do you have a driver's license that's valid, and do you have insurance? And other than that, your immigration status or your citizenship status is of little consequence.
That's interesting. We, in Utah, one of the few states who have what's called the driver's privilege card. For a time, we gave regular driver's licenses even if you were undocumented. Based on a lot of pressure, they wanted to do away with that. Many of us stood up and said, well, in law enforcement, public safety, if they're going to be here and driving, and they are until we resolve the issue, I guess, let's at least have them take a test and have ID and an address and a picture, and also carry insurance, which 85% of those who have driver's privilege cards do have insurance. And so I guess, and with our officers, since it looks a little different, it's turned sideways, the question was, well, when you pull someone over and they hand that as their ID, which basically says, I am in your state and your country in an undocumented status, what do you do about that? And until we're forced by a law that requires our officers then to detain and to check out their status on the side of the road or so forth, or to transport, they don't. They, as Chief says, their job is to keep the street safe and make sure that if you cite them and release them and they move on their way. What roles do you, well, let me just ask this, because Secure Communities has been an issue. The Secure Communities is a federal program that has worked with local communities. It's, the question is, how did Secure Communities become part of all counties in Indiana, if that's true? And what are the ways, is it resulting in too quick arrests, deportations, and so forth, in deportation proceedings? What's the experience been here with that, or in Indiana, or in Illinois, or Kansas, for that matter? Greg, you want to start with that?
Sure. Well, we've not had a lot of interaction on this. I mean, we do have it in all the 92 counties, but the local involvement is still pretty minimal. It's not something that comes up other than from time to time, but it's always coupled with other issues. So we've not even seen it as challenges in court. So I think even the public is probably unaware of some of that involvement.
Yeah, in Illinois, we have it mandated as well. We participate. There's counties that, in violation of what has been mandated, are not participating. I have not chosen to do that. You have an oath, and in my discernment, that the right thing to do is to cooperate on that minimal level. With regards to secure communities, though, prior to secure communities, I was observant of who we were deporting and for what offenses. Once secure communities came into status, I don't think it changed at all. But secure communities is the boogeyman in a lot of communities where people are seeing their relatives deported, and they think it's as a result of secure communities. It has a huge public PR problem. I have spoken to the leaders of, the director of secure communities, and in essence asked them to be much more transparent, because word will spread that so-and-so got deported for this minor offense, and by their lack of transparency, that seems to be what's believed.
I really don't have anything to add to that.
This is an interesting question that, and I'm not sure this applies, because in Utah, if Greg mentioned this, that when you do bring someone in and on an arrest, and you book them into jail, and then you determine that they are in an unauthorized status, you notify ICE, and you hold them for 24 hours, 48 hours. And in our case, generally speaking, if it's not a violent crime, they don't come pick them up. We have no federal holding facilities in Utah, and so we let them out in 48 hours. But there's this question about talking about what the author of this question is talks about the prison industrial complex. In other words, that there's a feeling that there is so much money to be made in prison industries that you see that they play a role in the surge of 1070 type laws. Is this in order to fill beds and therefore, help the budget in the county by building more county facilities? I haven't personally seen that. Is that something that you see or are concerned about? As far as
I think human beings are subject to all evils, whether it's pride, lust, envy, greed, and clearly that is going to be a motivating factor for some people in prison industry, the opportunity to make money off of human beings. We're going to build a detention center in Crete. ICER was instrumental in blocking that. I supported their attempts to block it, and we were able to alleviate that. We don't need more detention centers, certainly not for immigrants. We're hitting record deportation numbers every year, so anybody that tells you that we need one, that we don't need to have any higher deportation level numbers. We need to fix the system as it exists. The only thing, I think Cook County is the only one that doesn't participate in secure communities.
Any additional comments on that or thoughts?
Well, we don't, fortunately, municipal police don't get involved in incarceration other than we pass them off to our local sheriff, which is a great thing. But the cost of holding people who are merely here illegally would be prohibitive in our county. I mean, if we were to round up everyone who is undocumented in our community and put them in a secure facility in our county, that would be prohibitive, but we just wouldn't be able to handle that.
Well, and I would add, if you're looking at it as an economic motivator, the owner and the managers of the facilities that might have an economic interest in housing more people might be countered by the millions of people who have to pay taxes to support the cost of that. So I think the economics is really on the other side, that there's not a huge demand really to pay more taxes. I think Grover might have said that once upon a time.
We're getting near the end of our time, but let me just ask this. I mean, stay on the same topic of if you're required to, based on reasonable suspicion under an Arizona law or Alabama law, or probable cause arrest for a felony in Utah, and then the requirement that you then determine their status. And some states require you to do that on the roadside and hold them on the roadside until you're able to determine that, and then determine whether they have to transport. What does that do to effective policing? What is your normal routine and traffic stops and so forth? And then if you do have to transport, take your cops off the street for however long that takes to book them and so forth, what does that do to their regular responsibility as far as being on the streets? Chief?
Well, your average traffic stop is less than 10 minutes long. I mean, to stop someone for speeding, write them a citation and tell them to have a good day takes less than 10 minutes. But if we were to stop and ask everybody their citizenship status, and if we had to detain everyone, especially in Garden City, on suspicion of being in this country illegally, it would take officers off of the streets for hours while they were processing these folks. And that's just not something we have the manpower to do.
There is this, a lot of the misinformation that was used behind a 1070 and other laws, and there was a lot, as you know, but one of them was that you hear a lot about, and you see it all over the internet, that 80%, 85% or more of the crimes are committed by Latinos or undocumented immigrants. So what has been your experience in that? Have you seen any studies? I know in Utah we are currently studying. We actually have one coming out pretty soon. But what has been your experience? Do they commit crime at a higher rate than other members of your communities?
No, in Lake County, Latinos are 21% of the county. Lake County, Illinois, approximately 800,000 people. Latinos are a smaller percentage of the crime than is reflective of their overall numbers. What happens, though, is they get picked up on an offense for which everyone else is going to be able to post bond, but ICE puts a hold on them because they don't have legal status. And so it skews their numbers in the jail, and then they make up a much higher percentage of your jail than is reflective of the actual crime rate.
In Indiana, we recently had a Pew Center on the State's study of our prison population, so it didn't really have a significant percentage. So I think the answer is clearly no. But just from a logical perspective, you can look at certain types of crimes that might be more targeted toward the immigrant community. So human trafficking, for instance, you'll see people involved in that are probably going to be undocumented because they're bringing in young girls from other countries. Some of the drug trade that comes up from Mexico or through Central America, some of those are going to have a higher number. So I think there are certain types of crimes that are primarily going to be based on an immigrant population, but it's not an overall significant population on just crime generally.
We keep a monthly report on activity, and it tells us ethnicity, race, religious inclination or dress, and gender of everyone who we stop in a traffic stop. And even in a community of our proportions, they usually run 50-50, minorities versus non-minority contacts. Crimes are usually committed by the same people every month. It's not necessarily based on race or ethnicity. It's a recidivism issue where we have the same repeat offenders every month.
Thank you. We have just a little bit of time, a couple more questions. There seems to be a lot of concern about ICE, and I'm not sure you can answer these, but if you can, that is, I mean, and we probably ought to have a federal official here, but questions about if the community can have access to ICE data, information about arrests and individuals and so forth. And then someone had a comment here that it says we have a jailhouse, Tajma, T-A-J-M-A, I don't know which state we're talking about. It's where, here in Indiana? Okay. And ICE paying the mortgage on the jailhouse. Have you seen that in your states, or? No. And our 300, are they all federal criminals, federal charge? But you say there are a number of undocumented there just for no other reason other than they're documented? Serious charges, right. We have of all our counties, we have 19 counties in Utah, and only 2 of our county jails have contracted with the federal government as holding, and so they do get they get paid.
Right.
Actually, they pay better than the state
Right.
reimburses them for state prisoners.
Absolutely.
Did you see that happen in some of yours? And is
Yeah,
it-
there's a county that neighbors us that has a contract with ICE, and as General Shurtleff said, the rate of reimbursement is substantial. So it's tough when you're, looking at needing new squads and what have you, and ICE comes in here and offers you all this money to be a detention center.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And your county commissioners, your elected officials trying to balance the budget, they're seeing that as a cash flow, and so they need to hear opposition from those who elect them, I would think, if they have a concern about that, say it shouldn't be just about the money, the bottom line. Sir, why don't you just go ahead and ask your question, because we're out of time. Just so everybody can hear the questions, when an officer pulls over a car, can he ask everybody in the car for their citizenship status? Everybody, passengers in your states?
No, we don't even ask anyone what their citizenship is. We don't want to get involved in that. We can ask for identification, but citizenship is of no interest to us.
Similarly.
There are states who are passing those, not only a requirement that you determine the driver's status, who you've pulled over for whatever offense, but also will allow you to detain, or require you to detain passengers and determine all their status. And I'll tell you, as that's now finally, the Supreme Court, as you know, allowed Arizona to go forward with their show me your papers, they call it that, their determination based on reasonable suspicion. That was just to allow them because it had only been challenged as a facial challenge to the constitutionality. Now, as applied, now that we have cops actually stopping people and asking them and holding them, there will be a number, if not already, of lawsuits filed on as applied, alleging violations of civil rights, profiling, and so forth, even though many of these laws say, you have reasonable suspicion in a country illegally, but you can't consider, you can't profile, but then the police officer are going, no, so what am I supposed to use to determine whether there's suspicion they're here? So it kind of as a wrap up, let's just quickly run through and see if there's, what role should law enforcement play as far as speaking out, being playing in the states and maybe even nationally on immigration reform. Let's just leave it at that. If you have any suggestions or ideas, we'll conclude with that.
Well, I think we should encourage or discourage anything that would lean towards racial profiling. And let's face it, if in my community, even folks who have lived there all their lives, if they happen to be Hispanic and don't have their driver's license with them, who are we going to ask about citizenship versus who we're not going to ask? And I think anything that smacks of racial or ethnic profiling should be discouraged.
I would just say also that I think that all these issues are intertwined. That's the beauty of today, is that faith and economics, because we're on the winning side of all these arguments. Faithful Muslims, faithful Jews, faithful Christians, it doesn't matter, faithful Mormons. Sheriff Arpaio, when I was on the wrong side of this issue, I remember reading his book that he was an altar boy, and I asked him about that. He said he stopped going to church years and years ago because the priest was beating him up on the immigration issues. So I think that ultimately, those of us that believe that we're all connected, what have you, recognize that we're on the winning side of this for so many different reasons.
Well, I think the respect I have for the men and women who serve in our law enforcement is such that you have to really recognize their role in trying to be part of the community. So whether they look out and see undocumented workers, that's not really any violation of our state statutes. They're part of our community, and the law enforcement really have to develop a mutual respect. That respect is not really born of focusing on federal violations. It's really born of this need to protect the community as a whole. So we have people who target the immigrant populations because they're vulnerable. They will not talk to law enforcement, and we need to really arm the law enforcement with better relationships so that whether it's drug dealers that are working in a community or people who have human trafficking issues that are immigrants, we really need to develop a stronger relationship, and that has to be built on mutual respect to one another. And that's not going to come with a focus on some problems that are more directed in Washington's failure to really help us with this.
Thank you very much. Let me just conclude and piggyback on that by saying, you know who are talking to these youth? I mean, in Utah, Latinos may be 12% of the population by census, but almost 70% of gang members, criminal gang members, are Hispanic kids in Utah. So if the kids, and they're being told every day by gang members around them, your parents are here undocumented or illegal, white society considers them criminal, they're going to punish them, you're a criminal, you can't succeed in this community, the only way you succeed is by sticking together with the Sarreños or the Norteños or whatever. That's the only way you succeed. And when we rob those kids of hope, if we don't give them opportunities, if law enforcement then is suddenly seen as the enemy, instead of working there with basketball leagues and getting to know these kids and encouraging them to stay away from drugs and out of gangs and stay in school and learn English, then overall these kids will not have a chance. And there's plenty of people waiting who will talk to them and lead them down the wrong path. So we're delighted to be a part of this ongoing discussion. The law enforcement, public safety issues are behind everything, including in-state tuition. It's why we continue to have in-state tuition, because we want to continue to give these kids hope in the future. And so with that, we want to thank you. Please thank the panel for their service and protecting, and just say, be safe, guys, be safe out there. Thank you. That, just want to come right up, Ali, and we're not going to take a break, right? Let's just go right into our conclusions. Let these gentlemen have a seat.
But I can't be Mark Shurtleff. So, long day. People have traveled from 10 states across the Midwest. We've got Manuel Cunha here from the Central Valley of California. We've got M.N. Cawthorn and his colleagues here from Alabama. And we've covered a lot of ground. I think it's clear that if you hold a Bible, if you wear a badge, or if you own a business, you really, really, really want a common sense solution to the immigration system. So after this long day, I think what can we look back and learn? Well, for myself, I've learned that, yes, the Midwest is the best region in the country. And I've also learned that there's a difference between Hoosier hospitality and Boilermaker hospitality, or they're one and the same, but you just have to be careful where you say it. But I've also learned that we have really a great, great friend and a great champion here in Attorney General Greg Zeller. He's a person that we've had the opportunity to work with over the last couple of years every now and then, and his staff and his leadership in pulling together today, but also his vision for how Indiana law enforcement treats immigrants is just it's an example that we hold up across the country. And of course, our friend Utah Attorney General Mark Shurtleff. I also want to thank Angela Adams for being a great MC for the day. Can we give her a round of applause? But after a long day, we know one thing. This is a tough issue, right? It didn't get any easier today. But we also know that we're not alone. So in the past, we'd ask, you business owner X, can you get out there and talk about, the need for immigration reform? Well, after today, business owners can say, sure, because standing next to me will be a pastor, a police chief, or we can ask a police chief to stand up. And they will say, well, this is who I'm going to be standing with. So it's this idea and this reality that there are different constituencies, there are different leaders who are looking for the same solutions. And each one of us can speak to our communities, our audiences, in a very unique language, in a very powerful language, in a way that resonates, in a way that people can understand. Because as Grover put it, this isn't about what we say to our communities only. It's not just about that, but it's also about what we say to our elected officials. So, this is the third summit that we've done. We did the first one in Utah about a year ago, where we, had leadership from Idaho, Wyoming, and Colorado in for a one-day meeting in Utah. Then in June of this year, we did one in Atlanta, where we had leadership from these three constituencies, from the Carolinas, from Alabama, from Florida, and from Tennessee. And then today from 10 states across the Midwest. I'm going to tell you a quick story about after that meeting in the Southeast, in Atlanta. There's later that week, there was a meeting with a senator from Texas. There's only two of them. You can just pick one. And it was amazing because in that conversation, the person who was talking, he came and he was in Atlanta. And you know what he said? He said, Senator, I was with Larry Wooten of the North Carolina Farm Bureau. I was with Chief John King of Doraville, Georgia. And Senator, you were putting them in an untenable situation until we fixed the immigration system. So all of a sudden in that one conversation, Senator Cornyn realized it wasn't just about, the law enforcement community. It wasn't just about business. It wasn't just about the faith community, but it was about all these different communities who were conservatives, who were his base, his community, saying, we got to fix this, and we got to take advantage of whatever opportunity comes up to fix it. And we believe at the Forum that the opportunity coming up is going to be in 2013. Because based on all the hard work that we've done today, all the hard work leading up to today, whether it's in this region or in other regions, that on December 4th, we're going to be able to tell the new Congress, the new administration, whoever just won, that there is a new consensus on immigrants in America. And our expectation is that whoever just won must represent that consensus. So we hope that you're going to join us on the 4th for a strategy session. It's not going to be, straight ahead, this is what we're doing. This is going to be a strategy session. We're going to sit down, we're going to roll up our sleeves, and we're going to think about, okay, how do we move a message? How do we change the culture in our states so that members of Congress are hearing from their constituents? And that's a really important moment. And then on December 5th, we're all going to head up to the Congress and head over to the administration, have conversations, and tell them that in 2013, when they start the 113th Congress, when the next administration steps into their role, it's our expectation that they move immigration reform forward. And that's a huge responsibility that all of us own together, and it's a huge responsibility that we are really, really, really proud to work on with you. So 3 summits, Mountain West, Southeast, Midwest, 3 compacts. We haven't even mentioned the Indiana Compact. I mean, the Indiana Compact followed the Utah Compact and did such an incredible job of just starting to change the debate here in the Midwest. So there's 3 compacts, Utah, Indiana, Iowa. The evangelical community, the Catholic community, the Jewish community have all been doing incredible work. So I hope we all leave today with a sense of energy, a sense of enthusiasm, because it's about Bibles, badges, and business, folks. It's easy to say, it's easy to remember, and it's about who we are. It's about everybody in this room taking a stand, taking a role in pushing our members of Congress and our nation forward to fix the immigration system. So we will see everybody in December. Thank you again very much for coming today. There's now a tour of the Lucas Oil Stadium if you're interested. Guthrie is going to be helping with that tour because he's awfully excited to and take the tour. And we'll follow up with everybody very, very shortly. But again, thank you very much and have a wonderful weekend.